Imagine staying home to raise your kids for a few years, only to realize when you're ready to enter the workforce that you can't even get an interview. Employers just don't seem to be interested in all of these transferable skills you've gained as a stay at home mom. That's exactly the situation that this mom finds herself in. She writes, I've been a stay at home mom for a few years. I thought that when I went back to work, all the skills I've built as a mom, time management, multitasking, problem solving, working under pressure, would count for something. But here I am, a year into my job search and nothing. No calls, no interviews. I'm starting to wonder if it's the resume gap or if employers are passing me over because I don't have any recent work history. I thought being a stay at home mom for a few years wouldn't be a big deal. How do I get back into the workforce without any recent history? I'm so sorry you're going through this. I think that now going into the workforce in this current season of life is really challenging because so many people are experiencing a lot of job insecurity. So you're kind of going into a market that is also flooded with a whole bunch of other job applicants. But I think that we've kind of framed in our mind how easily we'll be able to re enter the workforce when we're ready. And that unfortunately just has not been my experience, nor the experience that I've discussed with other moms. That I think it's really important for us to recognize and understand if we make the choice to stay at home with our kids and decide to enter the workforce at a later point. Now, in relation to this mom specifically, like we don't have access to your resume, your cover letter, so we don't really know how you're framing or positioning yourself to job applicants and potential employers. But I would say that, and I'm not saying that this is right nor is it legal, but I do think that sometimes moms are discriminated against when we go back into the workforce because there's this perception amongst employers that, oh, if we have kids, are they going to have to work around the kids' school schedule? And do you need time off during holidays? And do you need time off or reduced hours during the summer? And do you have limited availability? And what about outside commitments or conflicts? Do you have childcare when your kid is sick or, you're just not able to show up to work because of some other variable that typically defaults to the mom when it comes to having kids. And again, I'm not saying that's right, I'm not saying that's even legal, but I am saying that I do think this is a variable that employers are considering when they're determining whom to hire. But I think that we need to discuss some other things, expectations that we have told ourselves as moms when we choose to stay home with our family about re entering the workforce. And one of them is that we have developed all of these mom skills like conflict management and time management and multitasking that make us really good employees and will really benefit us when we go to re enter the workforce. And unfortunately, that is just not the case. And are there some employers out there that may not necessarily care or do see the value in the transferable skills? Yes, but I think we do need to understand how employers may be viewing some of these different skills and how that doesn't necessarily benefit us when it comes to our professional experience. So, for example, one of the big things is that everyone has to manage their children and their home outside of work. And even though we are really doing an incredible job managing our household, but on the other hand, all of the professionals that also are working full time or part time are doing those exact same things at their own home. So for you to say, oh, I have all of these skills that maybe my competition for this same particular job, they're also bringing all of their professional skills in addition to their home skills into the job market that you are competing against. And one of the things when it comes to validation of your experience is on resumes, we are not typically putting our friends or family. In fact, you usually cannot list your friends or family as a reference because there's like that bias involved. And when it comes to taking care of your home, even though, again, you may be excelling at it and you are maybe above and beyond what other moms may be in a similar situation, you can't or shouldn't be listing your spouse or your kids as a reference to how well you've done in that position as a stay-at-home mom. Like that just would not be appropriate. When you are in an actual employer's position, you have other people there constantly grading your performance and giving you feedback and also validating how well you perform in that role. So that way, if you have previous job history, your new potential employer can, call up your previous employer and say, would you hire this person again? How well did they perform in this role? Whereas when you're at home managing your own home, there's not anyone there to validate how well you're doing that position. You could have a home that is in complete disarray. You could not be doing very well multitasking, but there's no one for your employer to call that is a third party, unbiased opinion to validate how well you do in that role. So some parents who may be completely underwater, really struggling, and really having a hard time managing their home can also be competing against you in the same workforce for a particular job, and there's really no way of validating whom is better in at those actual job duties when it comes to saying like, oh, I'm a better candidate for this job position, because you could both be providing the same skill, but one of you are excelling in that role and the other one may not be, because there's no outside validation proving how well you manage those skills in your own home. And again, we're also competing with people that are working and also required to do the same skills and roles and services for their family and for their home, despite the fact that they're also working full-time or part-time, going after the exact same job. Another thing that I think that we as stay-at-home moms sometimes heavily rely on is all of our previous experience. And unfortunately, that experience can become quickly outdated, especially in today's day and age where technology moves so quickly. I mean, now in the workplace, so many people are integrating AI. The longer you go in the time period where you are not in that same career field, using and applying those skills and like navigating to the changes in the industry while those micro changes occur, it is going to feel a little clunky when you go back into the workforce, even though it may be the exact same field of your previous experience. You're going to have at least some time frame where you are adjusting to all of the changes in the industry. We can sometimes say like, oh, well, our previous experience should speak for itself. But some employers don't necessarily care about those previous experience, especially in industries that change so quickly. For example, in my current job where I'm working at an accounting firm and we're in QuickBooks every single day, and yet the software completely updated in QuickBooks, they completely changed their layout and where things were. And even though it was a change from one day to the next, it still took me some time to kind of figure out where are things at? How can I navigate this new layout so that way I can be really efficient and effective in the job role that I'm doing? But if I had stepped away from my employer for even just a few months, the time that it would have taken for me to reoriented myself to like, okay, what is the QuickBooks version that I'm used to from what I remember and where things are, and how do I translate to where everything is laid out now in QuickBooks? The longer the gap is between that previous experience to what it is today, the more challenging it is going to be for moms to catch up those skills. And that's not to say that we can't do it, right? We are highly adaptable. I mean, look at all the things that we deal with at home on a day-to-day situational like typical experience. The time that you take to reorient yourself and revalidate all of those skills and kind of get up to speed again is time taken away from your employer that is going to cost that employer time and money and effort, compared to if they have someone else that has been in the work field and is bringing the same level of experience and skills. You just have to realize that you're competing against all the people that have been in the workforce that can come in and kind of take off day one. That's one of the things that I think that we also need to be situationally aware of when we decide to step back and go into a portion of our life that we're saying like, okay, I'm not going to be working in the career field that I currently was and that I hope to re-enter later in life. The other main point that I think is really important for us to also kind of discuss is the fact of authority. So when you're in your own home, you might have conflict resolution skills like managing your toddler throwing tantrums, or how your kids might be bickering and you settle a dispute, or, managing conflicts with schedules, right? All of those are really important skills that we develop as moms. But when it comes to the workforce and we're trying to position these skills that we have learned and honed being moms, our authority in the workforce is completely different than the authority we carry in our homes. To say that those skills are transferable is true, but we also need to identify and realize that the authority we carry is completely different. So, for example, the negotiation that you may be doing with a client or with a sales position is a completely different position that you're negotiating than when you're negotiating with a toddler that's throwing a tantrum, right? You may still have those negotiating skills, but the authority you carry over your toddler to set the tone and determine the response that you have and the consequence that they're going to receive is a completely different dynamic than negotiating a sale with a potential client. And so are there transferable skills? Yes, but we also need to realize that those transferable skills are not to the same degree of authority, because you have a lot more control over how you respond in your home to the conflicts that arise and the different variables that you interact with versus the variables and conflicts that arrive in the workplace. It's a completely different dynamic. These are different variables. And so the whole way that we're approaching conflict resolution and negotiation in the professional workplace is completely different than how we're navigating that experience in our own home. So, what do we do in the situation where we have decided to step back and go out of the workforce for a period of time, like this mom is writing and experiencing? It can be very unique to the job industry that you're going into and how different employers and recruiters, their biases when it comes to job gaps and stay at home parents that have chosen to take some time out of the workforce to care for their kids. But I do think that sometimes it is really helpful to just straight up just like identify that there is a gap and then explain why you have that gap. So I have heard of some moms in their resume listing out their previous experience, and then in the gap where they were at home taking care of their kids, just saying like stay at home mom or stay at home parent. But I think that we need to be very careful to really identify the difference of what are professional skills that we have versus inflating personal skills that we have acquired from managing our home, and then trying to pass them off as professional skills because they are not, like we already kind of addressed. I'll just kind of speak from my own experience of how I approached getting back into the workforce after taking some time off, being a stay-at-home parent. When I came back into the workforce, I wanted to enter a completely new job field than what I had experience in. So I was at a really big disadvantage when it came to trying to step into an industry that I had no experience in. I decided not to pursue a remote position because in my area, it is much more rural. So there are limited opportunities, but then because there's a limited population, there are a limited amount of people that I am competing against for the same position. I decided to just try to get something else on my resume that was just a job whatsoever, so I could have current validation of how I am as an employee today. So I ended up taking a serving position just to fill that gap. It was for several reasons, like just like having an outlet outside of my home, feeling like I was contributing to the family finances and trying to help fill and meet some of our financial goals. But also it was to make sure that I could have like current references for my future employer for this position that I really actually wanted to be in, to be able to call and authenticate my experience as an employee, not as a parent. So that was one of the things that I wanted to do and what I pursued to kind of have like a stepping stone. The other thing that I did is I called around to employers that I would be interested for the career field that I was going into. So I was coming from an IT and quality background, and I wanted to get into finances and accounting. And I called to several different firms in my area to see if they had any positions that maybe were not posted online. And in doing so, I'm limiting that competition pool because I might be going in for a job that hasn't been posted anywhere else. And by taking the initiative and showing why I'm interested, why I would be a good candidate, we need to be very aware that sometimes new employers may not be willing to take a risk on us because of how of a big of an year gap there is in our resume from previous experience to where it is we are now re-entering the workforce. If you can identify what skills are really important in the job industry that you're going in, and then using certain stories or experiences from either at home or ideally your professional experience, where you can exemplify that you have a lot of knowledge and skill in those areas that are going to be really important to that potential employer. So with that, I think sometimes if we know that we are looking or desiring a full-time position, sometimes we might have to take micro steps to get there And this is one of the reasons why I personally, from my own experience and from what I've witnessed from other moms and, all of the different variables and situations that moms sometimes find themselves in, I personally have decided that I always want to be employed in some manner, like moving forward, because, things can occur like a death or an illness or job loss from my spouse. And if we are only relying on one source of income and I have a huge gap in my resume, I want to be hireable compared to all the other people in my job applicant pool, so that way I can end up meeting the financial needs of our family should something unexpected happen. Like sometimes I think as moms we have this grandiose idea that like, oh, as long as my partner or my spouse is taking the financial care of our family, then there is no need for us to have these employable opportunities in a job market. Well, again, what would happen if, something tragic happens to your spouse? What if they get in a car accident? What if they die? What if they have a layoff? What if, they experience a serious illness? Or what if you end up divorced? Having some of these opportunities gives you more choices and more freedom. And if we have a huge gap in our resume and then trying to get back into the workforce, we might have to take low paying jobs. We might have to take level entry jobs. We might have to take part time positions. And if we need a full time job right away, we can find ourselves in a really challenging position when we're trying to take care of the financial aspect of our family, especially when we're in another large pool of other applicants that are bringing years of professional experience to the table that we are then competing against. And we have this really large gap in our resume where we don't have any current professional skills. So that's another thing from kind of experiencing that gap in my resume and realizing like, oh, this is really hard, even though it was like only a 2-year gap, getting back into the workforce and into an industry that I was interested and really passionate about pursuing than the industry that I was in before. So I think if you are kind of looking ahead, thinking like, oh, maybe when I put my kids into kindergarten, then I'll get a part-time job, you might need to be thinking now about like, okay, what are jobs that you can do that will work around, all the other family obligations that you have? Because I don't think that having a job should necessarily mean that you are providing a really horrible family life for your family, right? Like we need to figure out how to create some sense of balance. And I know balance is really hard to discuss in this context because it's like who lives their life completely balanced. But I don't think that getting a job should be to the detriment of your family, but we also need to recognize that having a job sometimes provides a whole bunch of security and safety for our family because these unfortunate situations can occur. And so with that in mind, some of the things that you could do is maybe you go out and you get a volunteer position, even if it's unpaid. Having that outside party then validate your experience in a professional position, even though it's unpaid, can sometimes be helpful because you might be thinking like, okay, let's say you have 3 years before you want to enter the workforce. So you have 3 years to build up those professional skills between like the availability you have with your family. And that might mean that you are working weekends, that you are working evenings, that you are working around the other schedule of your spouse, and that you are taking time away to fill in those gaps and gain those professional skills so that way you can become more hireable when you're ready to re-enter the workforce on a more full-time or even part-time means. One of the things that we need to also be aware of when we're kind of thinking of volunteer positions is to recognize that some volunteer positions don't hold the same weight as paid positions when it comes to your hireability. Depending on the volunteer position, there's not always a certain level of professionalism or expectation held to your performance in volunteer positions because they're volunteer. So, for example, if you're volunteering, you're not going to have any consequences necessarily if you don't perform those duties or those responsibilities well. Those volunteer positions can be helpful, but I think that we need to be aware of how does that then play against like an actual paid position if we're trying to fill gaps in our resume to become hireable. Maybe more effort should be placed on those professional roles where you're getting paid and compensated versus when you're in a volunteer role. You may be in that position out of desperation for that organization, not necessarily because your skills are qualified and exemplified in that position. So I know that this conversation can be really hard to have, can be really hard to hear because we want to do the best things for our family. And I think sometimes staying at home can be really valuable and really helpful for our family. And I mean, we don't typically as moms make a choice that's going to hurt our family, right? We're always thinking like, how can I take care of my family? How can I meet their needs? We as moms end up sacrificing so much of our experience for our families to take care of their needs. So when it comes time for us to finally step back into the workforce, it can sometimes feel like we're being penalized because we've prioritized our family over professional skills in the workforce. And I don't want you to leave this conversation feeling as though I've negated the value that you bring to your family, because that is not my intention at all. That time that you're spending nurturing and caring for your family is valuable. And moms that are working, like, yes, there's this cost to choosing to stay in the workforce, or not necessarily even choosing, but being sometimes required to stay in the workforce to care for your family in a financial way versus being able to step back from the workforce and care for your family in a different way that's not necessarily always quite so tied to a financial support system. So, if you have chosen to do that and you're now experiencing challenges going into the workforce, I don't want you to feel through this whole like experience that, oh, the value you provided to your family during that season of time where you're home is invaluable, because it is incredibly valuable to your family. They needed you there. You didn't necessarily step away just like because you're lazy, right? Being a mom is hard work, and there's a lot involved, and being a really diligent care manager for your home is really important, and all of those skills are incredibly valuable. But I do think that it's important for us to at least recognize the position that we sit in compared to employers and what they're specifically looking for. And so sometimes that means that because of the sacrifice that we have made to stay home with our family, that also means that we're going to be sacrificing again when we decide to enter the workforce, compared to other parents that had the opportunity or made the choice to stay in the professional world while they also carried the burden of providing for their family, just in a different way. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this conversation. I know it can be a little bit challenging, like navigating this whole discussion and this topic. And again, just like from my own experience, that's why I've just decided that I always want to stay employed in the professional world in some manner because of that, like even if it's just serving one day a week. So yeah, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, and I look forward to continuing the conversation in the comments. And let me know if you completely disagree. Like, I recognize that my perspective on this is just like one side based off of my experience and the experience that I've heard from other moms, and I'm curious to hear your perspective, even if it's completely different than mine. But if you have a question or kind of a situation that you would like us to discuss in a future episode, you can find a link down below to submit that. Or if you would like to hear similar conversations to this one, I'll link up an episode for you to watch next.